For those of you who are on my email list or follow me on social media, you may well already know that our daughter Josephine was recently engaged. And prior to her becoming engaged, Rodd and I, Rodd, who is here with me for this episode, my beloved husband of 28 years. We're going to talk about the conversation that we had with our future son-in-law prior to his asking our daughter to marry him. Now, I just need to tell you that Brian, that's his name, he is joining our family. He did not grow up in our family. He hasn't been a part of our family as I've gone from being very discreet to sharing more and more and more in my book, in the podcast, to my email list, on social media. My children are all very comfortable. In fact, one of my sons, when he was in high school, used to say, "Do not tag me on anything." But now he's fine if I tag him. And I, of course, don't share things that they would be uncomfortable with the world knowing, but it is a kind of acquired sensibility. And Brian may evolve and have that sensibility as a member of our family, or he may not. But for now, he doesn't have it. I think he finds it a little odd that someone would be so open about their life. So we are going to talk about the conversation that we had with him, but really we're talking about it from our perspective. We're not going to give you the play-by-play or reveal much about him in order to really respect his preferences. But we had so many people ask us about the conversation because they realized, like we did, there's no model for how to respond when a young man asks for our daughter's hand in marriage. So I have a lot more to say, even just to set this up, but anything you want to say at this point?
Well, that was one of those moments for me of feeling like, boy, here I am in the father role, and all I could think of was like television moments of when a future son-in-law comes and quote unquote asks for the hand of my daughter in marriage. And so I was clear. I wasn't sure. I couldn't even think back to anything that happened with you and your family when we were getting ready to get married to draw on. And so it was this question of, gee, like, where do I come from and how do I approach this conversation?
Yeah, actually, I think one of my biggest reference points is Love is Blind, the reality show, because once the couples who meet one another before, who fall in love and then see one another, at some point before they actually get married, they meet one another's families, and often they want the other family's blessing, which really is not relevant in our situation. I mean, Love is Blind has so many unique elements, and the fact is that Josephine and Brian have been together for quite a long time and been anticipating that they would get engaged. It's not some rushed thing. We've had plenty of time to get to know him, and
we did not arrange their connection in any way. Like, they found each other and met each other.
Yeah, and let's go further back, like you said. Like, now, my parents are not alive, and so it never occurred to me to ask them this, but I feel pretty certain that my father never asked my grandfather for his daughter's hand in marriage. And I can be totally clear that if you, Rodd, had made a point of asking my father for my hand in marriage, no matter what he said, I wouldn't have married you, because that would have conveyed just a whole bunch of things that weren't real to me. My relationship with my father
was... Not the basis of our relationship.
Not the basis of our relationship. My relationship with my father would have made that kind of a joke. He didn't even know enough about what was happening in my life or my values in order to weigh in. And the whole idea that his voice would have been needed before mine, just anyway. So this is all brand...
And I could not have seen you coming and asking my parents about marrying me. Like, there's all kinds of iterations you could think of, but it is such a great example of like cultural baggage and people's assumptions and all of that coming into this one moment when someone comes up to you and wants to have a conversation with you.
Right. And you and I, you did not suddenly surprise me with a proposal, the two of us kind of marinated and explored options and
Talked about it.
And we had some things we really wanted to work through. I had studied philosophy, and it was such an important part of my life. Even though there wasn't much philosophy in our medical education, we met the first week of medical school. We didn't know each other before medical school, but I wanted to be able to have deep, meaningful, philosophical conversations with you. And so I really did want to marry you, but I wanted you to be able to understand that part of me. So rather than asking for permission or blessing from the generation above us, like, I requested that you please learn something so that you could know me better and I could bring more of myself into the marriage.
Right. And that's when I was doing the teaching company courses, so that I could at least be fluent in some of the things that were so important to you.
Yeah. Anything you want to say about what was important for you that I do to...
Yeah, because I had been studying the martial arts for many years, and I could not imagine being married to somebody who couldn't physically handle themselves and take care of themselves. So I was strongly requesting that you at least do a basic self-defense course. So I felt like we were compatible on that level.
Yeah, and I did the course. It was intense and meaningful, and I learned a lot of skills that I still have, and I was able to understand you more deeply. So this is the background. However, I did expect, because of Brian's values and respectfulness and traditions, unlike the two of us in our day, that he would ask for Josephine's hand. However, I thought he would ask just you, because that is the traditional thing. And so some months before this conversation, I actually said to Rodd, when Brian asks you to have a conversation, please make sure to include me, because I want to be a part of that conversation. Did you have any particular feelings when I said that? I don't think you'd really thought about being asked until I brought that up.
Yes, and it would never have occurred to me that it wouldn't be a conversation he would have for us both, with us both, I mean. I mean, the same way that it wouldn't have occurred to me that we would sit down together and negotiate about how many goats we were going to exchange with each other or something. But anyway, it's the reality of our relationship that he would speak to both of us.
Yeah, and so I really honor him for actually asking to speak to both of us. So that wasn't something you needed to do. And what was that conversation like for you? Like, what were you thinking going into it? What intentions did you have? Did you prepare at all?
I thought about it a little bit because I knew that it was coming. And the thing that I really decided on was, after I realized how unprepared for it I felt being in the father role, was that I really wanted it to be more about like preparing him/them for marriage, not for the wedding or the proposal. It was more about me being willing and wanting to take on being in the role of being a father figure for this person, to the extent that that is a reality for young married couples. And so I have a daughter, and then I'm going to have a son-in-law. So me taking seriously that relationship, and then thinking, well, what advice would I have for somebody who's going to be marrying my daughter and taking on marriage as a thing? And those were the things I was thinking about.
Yeah, well, I really love that pretty close to the beginning of the conversation, you asked not in an interrogative way, not in a defensive way. I know I'm thinking of like TV shows to clarify that, but actually in a very loving, grounded, open, curious way, you said, "Why do you want to marry my daughter?" And I have to say that, well, first of all, my heart just opened. I just thought that was such a beautiful question and fell a little more in love with you, because that was really kind of using the conversation to establish a level of discourse among the three of us, which is genuine and, not the least bit superficial, really potent and relevant. But anyway, the answer really moved me. And one of the significant experiences that I took from the conversation is I'm used to orienting to Josephine as my daughter. And as my daughter, ever since she was conceived and born, I'm aware of how she is now and where she's headed in her development and how I can support her, not push her, not hold her back, but just really attuned to her development, learning to walk, learning to talk, learning to read, learning to dance, learning to play the viola, learning to...
And those are all the things going through your mind in this conversation too.
Yes. Well, there's a version of it I'm thinking of, what are the developmental steps of becoming engaged and individuating and partnering and all of these kinds of things. And when he gave his answer, there actually wasn't any of that in the answer. He just expressed his admiration, his love, like who he sees Josephine to be. And it really touched me, actually, and gave me a deeper appreciation for the different roles we all play in one another's lives. Because, of course, you and I look at one another that way, but it was really moving to hear someone else looking at one of our children in that way. And it was just a really beautiful way to begin that conversation.
And one of the things that I was listening for in that moment was, what's the basis of their relationship? I know what the basis of our relationship is with each other, but what's the basis of their relationship? It's kind of a personal question that you might not get to in casual conversation, but this was a context where there was a chance to get a little window into that. And also to listen for, are there aspects that of marriage or of our daughter that it'd be good to point out or bring up, because it's not where they're thinking or what they're focusing on now. But, it'd be good to know if you're marrying our daughter, this is something good to know about her or something like that. So that was part of what I was listening for and as I received the answer to that question.
Yeah, and there's something else that arose for me that I want to share through contextualizing the Quaker weddings I've been to. I've been to a number of different Quaker weddings, not recently, a while ago, but the way Quaker weddings work, at least the ones I've attended, is that everyone present is a witness. And there isn't specifically an officiant, but people speak as they're moved to speak. And at some point, the bride and groom stand and declare themselves to one another, speak their vows, and through everyone present, we witness what they share. And there's a sort of like a ketubah for Jews and a marriage license with the courthouse, but basically there's a document and everyone present signs it. And through signing it, we essentially agree to hold that marriage as something sacred and stand behind it, offering support as indicated in whatever manner seems relevant. So that's a Quaker wedding. And I'm just using that as a reference point because I think one of the things that came from this conversation is that I have an expanded and more meaningful, more essential way to support the marriage, which is really different than wedding planning and talking through when there's something challenging or hearing some happy news. It's like in you asking, why do you want to marry her, rather than just assuming she's wonderful, so of course you do, and she loves you. No, it's like, what is your conscious answer about why you want to marry her? And his answer paved the way for another layer of support for their relationship, in my experience.
Yeah, and I was very aware that from a certain point of view, I knew he was just like waiting the whole conversation for me to say yes or no. Like, can you marry my daughter or not?
Yeah, I just want to interject. It was very dear because when he reached out to us, he said, do you have time for a quick conversation? And I also said to you, like, I don't think it's going to be quick. Like, we're going to use this not as some either meaningful or not formality, but as actually a deep, sacred portal we go through together.
Right. And I was aware that before I was going to say the official yes or no, which was going to be kind of the ending of the conversation, I wanted to have a deep, thoughtful conversation. So we've at least had that level of discourse. And I wanted to offer myself to him. Like, if you are having trouble in 5 years or 10 years in the marriage, I'm available to support you, not only our daughter. And I'm committing not to just be the father of Josephine, but to be in the father/father-in-law role to both of you, that you're becoming a married couple now. And so I have a relationship with both of you and not just Josephine.
Yeah, what I was saying when I referenced the Quaker wedding in terms of like being able to really back the marriage, I think that's very similar to what you're saying. And honestly, he was really pleasantly surprised because, well, this makes me think of my own mother, who used to say, like, often, if we get divorced, she gets you. And finally, I told her to stop saying that. Like, I didn't enjoy it, but it was her way of saying to you, her relationship with you is not contingent on whether I'm happy with you. It's not mediated through me. It's a direct, loving, warm welcome to the family from my mother to you, regardless of our circumstances going forward. And, we didn't need to test that, happily, and it wasn't really my preferred way of expressing the sentiment, but I do think it was a wonderful sentiment, and you expressed it in a much more generous, upright way in which you really acknowledged the yes we both have to him now, not just the yes to our daughter and who she's chosen, but to him and supporting him in his growth and his fulfillment in marriage, to whatever extent he wants to kind of lean into what we offer.
And that was really what I came to as I was thinking about it ahead of time, is I'm not really saying yes or no to his giving her a ring or something like that. I'm saying, am I a yes to him becoming part of our family? And now we're going to have a couple, not just Josephine. And am I a yes to parenting the two of them to the extent that adults have a parental role with in-laws or their parents anymore? And that was really what I wanted to be a yes to on the inside, to say a yes to his question of, can I marry your daughter?
Yeah, and I think another piece of this that we had a kind of fun exchange about, the three of us, is whether we, or in that moment you, were giving permission or you were giving your blessing. And they feel so, so different in terms of orientation. If we're giving permission, then really I find it diminishing towards Josephine, like that we and
she doesn't get to choose.
Yeah, that we and this man would make our decision, and we are so for our children as autonomous individuals, and yes, deeply connected and glad to be resources, but not to give them job descriptions for life.
And we do have a role, if we choose to exercise it, to give our blessing to their connection and marriage or not. And that is the kind of yes that we could offer.
Yeah, and what we didn't actually talk about during this conversation, but maybe we could right now, we never have, it didn't occur to me, is what are we giving when we give our blessing?
Yeah, and what I was clear I was offering was my support. Like, my support for in good times and bad times, and in sickness and in health. And if one of them is in the hospital, me showing up for the other one, whichever one it happens to be. And for me trying to, the same way that I try not to be, not play favorites between my children, to try not to play favorites between my daughter and her husband, because I'm taking on their relationship and him as a part of our family.
Yeah, it's really awesome. It reminds me, I have a couple right now that I'm coaching, and I have told each of them that I don't think of her as my client or him as my client, but I think of their marriage as my client in a way that's relevant for their particular situation. And I think it's a similar gesture that you really, there might be times when they both are having a challenge, but you can be a reminder and a guide for the beauty of their choosing one another.
And the one other thing I want to just include in this conversation that we're doing here is, as we were going through that evolution of his responding to the question I asked, and then our having a deep conversation about what he said and everything, I was thinking to myself, okay, am I a full yes, or is there something I need to put out? Or do I have a question? Like, if there's some lingering doubt or question that I have before I can be a full yes to supporting them both together equally going forward, I want to make sure I bring that out in this conversation and talk about that so that I can be a full yes from my heart when I say yes at the end of the conversation. And so we made sure to bring those things out and say, bookmark this, or we need to talk about this in the future, or this is something we really want you to know before, we can give our blessing, these kinds of things, including those things in the conversation so that I could be a full yes at the end.
Yeah, and just for somebody listening, I want to be clear, we had a really short list of those things, and we didn't actually talk them through. We just asked for his consideration to have another conversation like the one we were in when those issues arise in the future. That it was more to say, hey, on the path ahead, there are going to be these particular milestones, and we would like to have a conversation together when those milestones are relevant. We don't need to resolve anything right now. And to his credit, he said yes, he's open to that conversation. And
to be continued.
Yeah, and I don't think we'll discuss that, for years, but when it's relevant, we will. So I felt like more in love and just, tickled that we've had so many experiences together, sweetheart. We got engaged, we got married, we've had each of our children. Most recently, we've had one graduate from high school, which means we'll be sending our third child off to college. We've bought a home, we've sold a home. Like, we've had all these different milestones, and each time it's like kind of filling the riches of our shared life. And having this conversation with Brian definitely was in that category and was really heart-opening with him, but it also was really heart-opening between the two of us. And so I just mentioned that when sharing in an email that our daughter was engaged and on social media. And then I had cousins who have a daughter who is likely to become engaged sometime in the next year or two. And they got out a notebook and wanted to hear the details. In fact, she said to him, "Are you taking notes?" Like, they'd never, ever had the opportunity to learn about this. And there are multiple people who actually emailed me back from that email saying, "Will you please tell us more about it? We want to learn. There's never been a manual for this kind of thing." So that really is the gesture for our sharing this. And with that, I want to put like a Surgeon General warning that the way that this conversation went was very appropriate for who you are, who I am, our growth-oriented relationship to marriage, and who this fine, wonderful man is who will be marrying our daughter and joining our family. And so there may well be lots of things that we've said which really wouldn't pertain if you're someone listening and you have a future son-in-law or maybe daughter-in-law, speak to you in a similar way. So
right, I would just say my version of that is we've been interested and willing to share our experience, and there's no reason. If it speaks to you, great. And if your situation is very different, then I wish you to be inspired to make up your own playbook for how you want to handle it.
Yeah, exactly. But let's wind up with a few general principles that someone could, like as takeaways from what we're sharing. So the first one that I'll say is be intentional, like consider individually and with one another what goals you have for the conversation. That's one.
And I would say whether you journal or you see a psychotherapist, like take some time out to consider what arises in you and try to flesh that out or address it before you start the conversation so that you can be as present as possible for what's happening with the three of you in this case, rather than all of the baggage of your history coming into that conversation.
Excellent. Another principle that I would say, which I haven't really directly expressed in this episode, but I will just say from my own lived experience and what I have learned from so many people that I've coached, the beginning of a marriage, the beginning of those relationships really sets the tone for a long time to come. And it's just better to be respectful and honor everybody and work through any resistance you have to doing so, because it's just much easier to go forward with connection rather than have disconnections that need to be repaired 5, 10, 20 years later.
And the one other aspect of saying that I would include is whether you start with the same question that I did or not, that you begin with curiosity. Like, who is this person who's asking to join the family, and view it as an opportunity to get to know them and to get to know their connection to your son or daughter better.
Yeah, and building on that, it's interesting because the whole setup, and it often is portrayed this way in reality TV, is that the young person is asking, and it's for the future in-laws, the older, more experienced people who know about marriage, presumably, to be the ones to say yes or no. Like, the power dynamic is really clear in that regard in terms of how it's generally portrayed. And while Brian is super respectful, so he certainly came in with some of that, which was appropriate, you and I did not take that approach, but really interacted as though we were three equal people having a conversation about someone who is most dear to us, namely our daughter and his not yet fiance. And how do we meet in the most constructive, loving way as three equal people who care a great deal about Josephine and their future together?
And that's, for me, an extension of the first part about clearing out your baggage ahead of time, because if the reality of your family situation and marriage and dynamic is that you know and your kids don't know and you're going to give them permission, then have that be clear. And if the reality of your lifestyle and your kids' lifestyle is that they're really giving themselves permission, then you get to decide if you're going to give your blessing or be supportive of their relationship or not. And where do you want to come from? Let's say it's a given that they're going to go ahead and get married. How do you want to be in relation to that? Are you going to be dragging, slowing it down, or encouraging it, supporting it? What happens when they have trouble in the future? Are you going to be a resource to them, or are you going to be part of what creates more angst and difficulty for them?
So all of that is in this conversation, which was not a very short conversation, but I have to say that since then, he has proposed, Josephine has accepted, she has a beautiful ring on her finger, a wedding is being planned, and all of that feels so much better because while we already had this deep connection with Josephine, that conversation really clarified that we have that with Brian too. And so, which florist and what date and all of that is so much simpler for us anyway, because the really important elements have been addressed.
We got a chance to meet him and see who he is and get to know him and get to know them. And then that can be the basis for all the superficial stuff that comes later, instead of only gradually getting to know him over the next 5 years.
Yeah, and even though we have known him previously, it's always been sort of mediated through Josephine, and this was just a really beautiful opportunity to get to know this wonderful man. And so if he evolves in his sensibilities and offers the possibility that we can share more, that I can share more on the podcast, you'll hear more. And if he doesn't, I fully accept that, in which case, that's all you get about this
That's plenty.
wonderful man that we are thrilled to have join our family soon.
Beautiful.